Endvision and Exit Strategy, Unit 3.2, INTC 6543, International Church Planting. In this session, we will look at the concept of envisioning and exit strategy. Envision is a biblical concept. A reading from Joshua chapter 1, 1 through 6. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over to this Jordan, you and all these people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and its Lebanon as far as to the great river, the river Euphrates, and all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause the people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. So you see, Joshua was given the envision of the land that God was going to give the people. From the wilderness in the south to the Lebanon in the north, to the great river in the east, all the way to the great sea in the west. This shall be their territory, and no man will be able to stand before them all the days of their lives. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you, said God to Joshua. Nehemiah had an envision when he went back to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. When he got back to Jerusalem, he was there for 3 days, and then he arose in chapter 2, verse 12. He arose in the night, he and a few men with him, and I told no one what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by the night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down, and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. God gave us his envision. Revelation 7:9, and after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, people, and tongues, standing before the throne and the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands. One of the biggest struggles that many people face in ministry is trying to respond to the question, where do I begin? All too often people plant their lives in a place and just begin to work. They have no idea where they are going, thus they really have no idea where to start. So they jump right in without much thinking, planning, and preparation. I heard someone say once, if you don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. Or as someone else had said, if you don't know where you are going, you will never get there. In Revelation 7:9, we read the words of John, who was taken up into heaven, given a vision of the end, and then wrote down what he witnessed. God gave John a vision of what it was going to look like when God's word was fulfilled. There would be people from every nation, tribe, people group, and language group around the throne, praising the one who sits upon the throne. God knew what it was going to be like. God knew before the creation of the world what this was all going to look like. Everything that has taken place in the world since creation has been leading up to this final time when multitudes will gather around the throne and worship God forever and ever. As you begin to focus on your people group or geographical area, you must begin now to get a picture in your mind of what it will look like when the people group or geographical area will be fully evangelized. What will it look like if everyone among your people group or in the geographical area has had an opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus Christ? God is not willing that anyone perish. Therefore, we must begin our ministry by asking God to give us a glimpse of the end, a picture of what it will look like when the task is completed. This is where we must begin in our ministry. Without this picture, without knowing where we are going, we will never reach the destination. It is like walking out your door in the morning. You need to buy bread. Therefore, you need to go to the bakery. Not only do you need to know that you must go to the bakery to buy bread, but you must also know where the bakery is located. If you don't know, you will wander around aimlessly. Perhaps you might arrive at your destination, perhaps not. If you do not know where the bakery is located, you will eventually need either someone to personally show you the way or a map or someone to give you directions. Many people today in ministry have no destination. They have no real goals in their ministry. They just plant their life in one place and begin working. They have no real vision of what it will take to see the people group or the area where they are working fully evangelized or fully reached with the gospel. God is not willing that any should perish. Thus, you have to align your ministry with God's will for the people group whom you are seeking to reach. You have to get a picture of what it will look like at the end. Then everything you do will be designed to help you achieve that end vision. John was given a vision and he wrote that vision down. You have to do the same. You have to ask the Holy Spirit to give you a picture of the end. You have to ask God what it will look like if all the people in the people group or area have the opportunity to respond to the good news. Then you have to write it down just like John. The first thing you need to do is to know your focus or target group. So right now, write down your focus. That is, whom are you trying to reach with the gospel? Is it a district or some other geographical area? Is it a city? If so, you have to consider all the different tribes, people groups, or language groups in that area. Is it a people group or a language group or a tribe? Right now, write down your focus or target people group. This is the first step. After you have identified your focus, you need to begin trying to answer some key questions that will help you get a picture of the end. This will be the work that needs to be fulfilled. This is where you need to begin. The first thing you need to do that needs to be answered in developing your Endvision is how many churches will need to be planted in order for the people group or target area to have the opportunity to hear and respond to the gospel. You should not be thinking how many churches you need to be planting personally, or even how many churches your church planting team needs to be planting. You need to think how many churches it will take, how many churches need to be planted in order for everyone to hear and respond. In Cambodia today, there are numerous Baptist churches, but I only helped to plant the first one. In one state in India, a group of men determined that they needed 10,000 house churches. They were not thinking how many they would personally plant. They were thinking how many churches needed to be planted, whether by them or others, in order for everyone in that state to hear and respond to the gospel. In order to determine how many churches will be needed, you have to have some idea of how many villages or communities there are in your area or people group, or the number of villages and communities where the people group reside. If you are focusing on a geographical area, not only do you need to know how many villages or communities there are, but you also need to consider how many different people groups or language groups there are in those villages. If there are multiple people groups in each village, one house group per village or community, or one church per village or community may not be sufficient in order to achieve the goal of seeing all having the opportunity to hear. You may only know the overall population of your people group, but that is a good place to start. Right now, write down how many villages or communities there are in your area, or the number of villages and communities where the people group reside. You may not know exactly the correct number right now, but you should have some idea of how many are in your area or the number where your people group live. Therefore, write down the population of the target people group. Now write down how many churches you believe it will take to fully reach the people group or area where you are working. If you only know the population, you need to think if you need one church for every 5,000 in population, one for every 2,000, one for every 1,000, or maybe even one for every 500 in population. If you know approximately how many villages or communities there are, you need to decide if one church per village is adequate or not. The second question that needs to be answered as you develop your Endvision is what will be the characteristics of these churches? Will they all have buildings with a cross on top and a full-time pastor? Will they be small groups? What will the churches actually look like? This will help you know how to begin your work. Where will they meet? What will they do when they meet? How often will they meet? Who will be the leaders? How will the leaders be trained? How will the churches relate to each other? You have to think about these issues now. You cannot wait until later to figure this out because your destination will determine how you begin your work. Remember, this course is focusing on church planting and church planting movements. You should you should be thinking about reproduction and multiplying church growth. You should be thinking about churches planting churches. The characteristics of churches being planted will be very important. You'll want to think about the churches that can be easily reproduced by the people in those churches. Not only do you need to think about how many churches need to be planted, but also you need to begin to get a picture of the characteristics of those churches. So right now, begin writing down what you believe the characteristic of all those churches need to be. You may need to pause the video in order to do this. Remember, you need to know your destination before you begin your journey. Knowing your destination will determine how you will begin the work. As you answer these questions put forth in this lecture, be sure to consider that all your team does need to be reproducible by the local people with their own resources. Write it down. Where will they meet? What will they do when they meet? How often will they meet? Who will be the leaders and what will be the qualifications for those leaders? How will believers be discipled? How will leaders be trained? How will the churches relate to one another? Now that you have answered the above questions, you need to write out an Endvision statement that incorporates and consolidates the information in your answers. Below is a sample Endvision statement. Listen to this. To see a church planting movement among the ABC people group, there will be a church in every village, and the leadership will be local people chosen from within each group. Discipleship will be done in the local groups using teaching methods familiar to the people, such as storytelling and small group study discussions. Leadership training will also be done in the local groups in much the same way. They will worship in an indigenous way using local instruments and forms such as stories told through song. These churches will have as their main goal the planting of other churches. A church does not need money for a building or pastor support and therefore can use its resources to support church planters and evangelism efforts. Ideally, the churches will form their own associations that will facilitate joint celebration times and close fellowship between groups. These associations could be on a district-by-district basis. Initially, in all the districts where the ABC people live, we would like to see 100 churches planted. These 100 churches would then have a responsibility of multiplying, and those churches multiplying to the third and fourth generation and beyond, until each of the original house churches has seen another 1,500 churches planted to reach the goal of one church for every 1,000 people, or 150,020 churches. Wow, what an Endvision. But that's what we're talking about. Endvision and exit strategy are interrelated. Envisioning is asking God to give you a vision of what your people group will be if the entire people group has the opportunity to hear and respond to the gospel. As we seek to get this vision, we have to begin thinking how many churches need to be planted so that the entire people group can hear and respond, and it should then motivate us to begin to define and describe the kind of churches that need to be planted. Personally, I consider an effective or phase-out strategy has to consider 1. How the local church will be defined, 2. The number of local churches needing to be planted in generational multiplication, and 3. An ongoing process for training leaders. How you define a local church determines the end product of what is planted, and helping us know when to begin exiting a church plant is when we are able to see the body of believers functioning in the way that we believe the church should function. Thus, it is of vital importance that we stay as close as we can to the New Testament model and teaching of church. The more we seek to impose extra biblical requirements for what constitutes a church, the more difficult for the local people to attain these requirements, the more difficult it is to reproduce it, thus making it more difficult for the missionary to exit, because whether intended or not, the missionary has created a situation of dependency. Tom Steffen further concludes that another factor influencing our exit strategy is the number of local churches needing to be planted. In Envisioning, the vision is the number of churches needed to ensure that everyone in the people group has the opportunity to hear and respond to the gospel. For let's say that we believe that it will take 5,000 churches to be planted to fully evangelize X people group. Does the missionary hang around until all 5,000 have to be planted? If not, then when would the missionary or church planter begin thinking of exiting? These are difficult questions to answer. Most of us would not probably say that the church planter has to stay around until every one of the 5,000 churches needed has been planted, as that would likely mean the church planter has stayed around too long. At the same time, we know that leaving too early can bring into play an entirely different set of problems. That is why we must consider reproducibility in our church planting over the long haul. If we plant churches that are capable of reproducing themselves, and we witness this to say the third or fourth generation, then we can likely conclude that exiting should or could be happening. I like to use 2 Timothy 2:2 as a blueprint, even though it does not refer to church planting specifically. In this passage there are 4 generations: Paul, Timothy, faithful men, and others. If we apply this to the church planting, the church planter can seriously begin to exit from an area where he is able to witness healthy church reproduction to the 4th generation. If this is happening, one can be fairly certain that things are moving in the right direction. Then the church planter can move to another area and start the process all over again. Another way of thinking of exiting an area when church planting is through the training cycle: model, assist, watch, and leave. The church planter enters an area, models for the local people how to plant a church by planting the church in their midst. Then the church planter assists the church while it reproduces itself, co-laborers with the local church taking the major responsibility. Then the church planter observes while the church reproduces itself without the aid of the church planter. When this happens, the church planter can begin thinking exit to a new area. The question of when to exit an entire people group, however, is an entirely different issue. As you develop the church planting strategy and envision how many churches need to be planted, you also need to determine the strategic areas where the churches need to be planted. For example, in Cambodia we had an exit strategy, a reproducing church in every district. And we started with a church in every province, and provinces were divided up into districts. And so we said if we had a reproducing church in every district, then we could probably begin to start thinking about exiting. A third area that needs to be considered in an exit strategy is leadership. Does the church have the spiritual leadership it needs, and is the existing church, when it plants a new church, have the ability to develop and equip leaders for the new church? Without the ability to multiply leaders, the church's ability to reproduce itself is hindered. The church planter not only needs to train leaders for that first church plant, but he also needs to begin equipping leaders to equip new leaders. This is so crucial. Toward the latter part of the course, we will spend some time on the idea of multiplying leaders. It is essential in cross-cultural church planting. Again, I prefer using the 2 Timothy 2:2 blueprint or the Mall cycle as a guide in determining when to exit. Church reproduction necessarily involves leadership reproduction. As you develop your church planting strategy for the people group you are serving among, ask God for that end vision that in turn helps you to determine an exit strategy. This is essential. If you do not know where you're going, you will never get there, and chances are you will never leave. A checklist for determining when to exit. Do churches have a vision for reproducing themselves among their own people group? Our goal in church planting should not be not only plant churches, but to facilitate those churches being able to reproduce. Church planters in a cross-cultural setting should not envision themselves as becoming the pastors of those churches and should not make a career out of working with churches they have planted. We want to exit when we see churches multiplying on their own, churches having a plurality of leadership and the ability of that leadership to train others, and when the responsibility for shepherding rests entirely and solely in the hands of indigenous leaders. Some example questions we need to ask are, does the church have a vision for this? Does the church have a vision for reproducing themselves among their own people group? Does the church have an Acts 1:8 vision to take the gospel to the Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth? Are the churches looking for areas to plant daughter churches? Are they actively seeking out places where they can plant new churches? Have they even started? Is there a plurality of leaders? Are all the leaders indigenous? Has the church planting team relinquished its leadership responsibilities? Are the leaders of the churches training new, emerging leaders on their own? Are the local churches able to support themselves and utilize their own resources for ministry, outreach, and new church plants? Are the leaders of the churches meeting regularly for support and encouragement? Do existing churches actually relate to each other? Is MAW, Model Assist Watch and Lead, being implemented in discipleship, leadership training, and church planting? Has the church planting team begun phasing out its participation in the local churches?